In education, we often hear the term reflective practice. We write reflective papers, and we encourage our colleagues and students to reflect. If we look up the definition of reflection, we will find something along the lines of serious thought or consideration. But what exactly is reflection and reflective thinking? The habit of reflection or self-examination is an intellectual virtue acquired over time from example, experience, and self-discipline. When we reflect, we examine the experiences of each day and measure our actions against the standards of right or wrong, justice and injustice, or truth and falsehood. These moral standards are our compass, and the habit of reflection is the process of checking our compass to chart an accurate course to a purposeful life. Any traveler must periodically check his compass if he hopes to reach his destination. Anyone committed to living a meaningful life must periodically reflect to navigate accurately towards this goal. Reflection prompts us to ask ourselves how we are living virtues in our personal and professional lives. Our ability to reflect is greatly strengthened if we form relationships with people whom we admire and trust for their good judgment and wisdom. These people help us to reflect on the right questions and help us to avoid self-analysis and excuses. Reflection can not only help us to realize our missteps and seek the help of mentors to get back on track, it also keeps us honest with ourselves and with others. When we take time to reflect, we strive to learn from our mistakes, we hold ourselves accountable, we acquire perspective, and we work towards constructive action. As we noted, reflection invites us to check our moral compass and to attend more carefully to those internal characteristics that define who we are. Reflection enables us to grow in self-knowledge and to lead a more flourishing life, precisely because it helps us to evaluate the worthiness of our goals and our commitments. When we fail to reflect, we fail to live our lives to the fullest. As Socrates so nicely pointed out, the unexamined life is not worth living. With this statement, he challenged individuals to provide an intelligible account of why they believe what they believe. For Socrates, the pursuit of truth is quintessentially a human activity. Only human beings can give reasons and reflect on the morality of their choices. What's at risk when we're not reflective? Well, at best, we run the risk of floating aimlessly along the surface of life with really no depth perception. John Dewey, who lived from 1859 to 1952, has made arguably the most significant contribution to the development of educational thinking in the 20th century. Dewey's exploration of thinking and reflection and the associated role of educators has continued to be an inspiration to this day. In his 1933 publication, How We Think, John Dewey suggested that reflective thinking is an active, persistent, and careful consideration of a belief or supposed form of knowledge, of the grounds that support that knowledge, and the further conclusions to which that knowledge leads. Human self-reflection is the capacity of humans to exercise introspection and to attempt to learn more about their fundamental nature and essence. The earliest historical records demonstrate the great interest that humanity has had in itself. More than 3,000 years ago, know thyself, an ancient maxim by the Delphic oracle, was inscribed in the court of the Temple of Apollo when it was built over the oldest known religious sites in Greece. When we experience failure, we want an explanation that's reasonable and makes sense to us, and we want to avoid making the mistake again in the future. We want to achieve the goal we missed, or to try to achieve a new, more realistic goal. Self-reflection allows us to critically examine our actions and our relationships with others. Generally, we practice self-reflection in two ways: reflection in action and reflection on action. The most obvious difference is in terms of when they happen. Reflection in action. This is the reflection that takes place while you are involved in the situation. Reflection in action involves using analysis of observation, listening, or feeling. It is like thinking on your feet, but the focus is on gaining a new perspective rather than just solving the problem. Because it's happening on the spot, this type of reflection often appears very intuitive. However, it can take some time to develop the skills of reflection in action. It is often a skill associated with the development of expert practice. Reflection in action means that we are interpreting information in real time. This involves a process of feedback loops. We need to ask questions like, how are people reacting to me? Is my approach getting me what I need? On the other hand, reflection on action is the retrospective contemplation of practice in order to uncover the knowledge used in a particular situation by analyzing and interpreting the information you recall. This type of reflection involves stepping back from the situation, meaning that it happens some time after the situation has occurred. Therefore, it does demand a time commitment. Reflecting on action requires us to ask ourselves tough questions. How did I fail my colleagues and myself so badly when I didn't intend to today? How did I manage to do well today when I've never done that well before? What is my role in this whole set of issues? If we search the term reflective practice, we find that it is the ability to reflect on one's action so as to engage in a process of continuous learning. According to one definition, it involves paying critical attention to the practical values and theories which inform everyday actions by examining practice reflectively and reflexively, which can then lead to developmental insights. A key rationale for reflective practice is that experience alone does not necessarily lead to learning. Dewey noted that deliberate reflection on the experience is what's essential. Reflective practice can be an important tool in professional settings, particularly where people can learn from their own professional experiences. It actually may be the most important source of personal professional development and improvement. It's also an important way to bring together theory and practice. Through reflection, a person is able to see and label forms of thought and theory within the context of his or her work. A person who reflects throughout his or her practice is not just looking back on past actions and events, but taking a conscious look at the emotions, experiences, actions, responses, and using that information to add to his or her existing knowledge base to reach a higher level of understanding. As leaders, we'll be working in groups and leading groups that require us to make decisions together. For many people, this is a frustrating experience. However, there are strategies that can help to guide a group through a decision-making experience. One method that may help small groups to make decisions is the reflective thinking approach. This approach was developed by John Dewey and has been in use in various forms for over 100 years. The reflective thinking method is an excellent way to efficiently solve problems within a group. This method provides the group with an ability to focus and not get lost when making decisions. So number one, define the problem. A group needs to know what problem they're trying to solve. One of the best ways to define the problem is to phrase it as a question. Now note, there are several traits of a clearly worded problem or question. It needs to be clear and specific. The phrasing of the question needs to be open-ended, which allows for many different answers. And the question should ask only one question. This increases the answerability of the question and allows the group to focus. Number two, analyze the problem. Before developing solutions, it is imperative that the group analyze the problem. This involves assessing the severity of the problem, the causes of the problem. Determining severity helps to understand who's affected and how any determining causes might naturally lead to solutions. This is also a step that contributes to a deeper focus on the problem. Number three, developing criteria for solving the problem. Before actually solving the problem, it's important to determine what characteristics and traits the solution should have. This is called criteria development. A criteria is a standard for what the solution to the problem should achieve. The criteria helps with focus, and it prevents people from generating ideas that are way off track. Number four, develop potential solutions. In this step, the group works together to develop as many solutions as widely and creative as possible. They record all of these ideas. Even though a criteria has been developed, it's not consulted at this stage. It's just a first step. Number five is where we select the most appropriate solution. All solutions that were developed are now judged by the criteria that was previously developed. Each idea is compared to the group of criteria. Each solution that meets the criteria is set aside for further discussion. Once all acceptable solutions have been chosen, now we get down to the business of picking the one that's most acceptable to the group. The first desire, of course, would be for consensus, which means everyone accepts the solution. If not possible, then the next option is to vote. Voting benefits the majority, but it often irritates the minority, and it's one reason why voting is usually the second option. Whether we are reflecting alone or in a group, we do always need to try to assess the intellectual, the emotional, and the physical effects. It's really important to get the facts straight so we can accurately interpret the actions and the reactions. We need to be honest about our emotional experience so that we can allow ourselves to feel what we need to feel instead of denying emotions. And it's critical that we be aware of the visceral reactions that explain what happened or what should have happened. Thought leader Amy Newman suggests that this is what we would want to call conducting a post-event review to evaluate successes as well as failures. She suggests that we ask questions such as, what was expected to happen? What actually occurred? What went well and why? What can be improved and how? This type of a review, of course, should take place ASAP, and it should be by the team and for the team. And it should be dynamic and candid and professional. It should focus on the results of the event or the task or the activity. It should identify how to sustain what was done well. It should identify recommendations on how to improve any shortfalls. And it really should include the participation of all stakeholders. So how do we help our students to reflect? Well, first of all, reflective teachers are more likely to develop reflective learners. If teachers practice reflection, they can more effectively encourage learners to reflect on, analyze, evaluate, and improve their own learning. Teaching students to reflect on their learning is an important part of positive lifelong learning. Reflection empowers our students to consider their actions, behavior, learning, as well as analyzing personal strengths and weaknesses. Having time to be reflective helps your students focus and then modify their actions and work in a purposeful way. We need to give ourselves plenty of opportunities for teaching reflection strategies, including working with children and older students individually, in groups, and in pairs. We also need to provide opportunities for written, verbal, or visual reflections. In conversations, there are a few questions we can ask students to get them started. For example, we can say, how do you think other people see you? Do you think it is the same way you see yourself? How do you interact with other people in positive ways? In what ways do you think you could improve your social interactions? Think about the ways you work. Are there any improvements you could make? Teaching reflection strategies is just one part of the self-reflection process. We also need to monitor whether a student's reflections lead to action. Are they making necessary changes or refinements? We can help them keep on track and support them in finding ways they can improve on past actions and learning. And as their self-awareness develops, their ability to self-monitor will grow. It's not just your students' academic progress that we should consider. Self-reflection helps them to make changes to improve their interpersonal skills that affect family, friends, and the wider community. Reflective characteristics will reveal themselves at different times depending on a child's self-awareness, age, and experience. We can help our students reflect on their learning and recognize the characteristics on this slide and their benefits. Another great way to teach children and older students about reflection is through books and literature, all the way from picture books to, high-level high school, pre-college literature. The questions on this slide are designed to help students to learn how to reflect through their interactions with literature.